Welcome back to my YouTube channel. For this week's offering, I'm going to work on another layout design project. Now this customer's train room is about the same overall size as the N-scale project I worked on a couple of months ago. But what is a good size space for N is actually a little bit cramped for HO. I can only get about a quarter of the layout in. But anyway, without further ado, let's head upstairs to the computer and take a look at the space I have to work with.
This layout design was subcontracted to me by another layout designer. I'm not quite sure why he didn't want to do it himself, but I gladly accepted the opportunity. It's an HO scale layout for a long narrow room. I was given some pictures at the start. It's 26 feet by 10 foot 9 inches, and as you can see from the picture, there are 4 big window-like openings around the outside of the room, which actually opens up some very interesting viewpoints that would not normally be available on most layouts. And if we look, we can see that the entry to the room is in the middle of one long side, but that opening there is around 8 feet wide, so I have a certain amount of leeway as to where I put the entry to the layout. If we look around the other sides, we have some more views of it. And actually having these pictures sent to me at the start gives me a much better idea of the space I'm designing for. It's a luxury I've not had before. Anyway, let's close these down. When it comes to the specifications for the layout, I was told that the customer wanted 28-inch radius curves so that he can run passenger cars. Now personally I disagree. I don't think 28 inches is sufficient for running passenger trains. I was also told that he wanted the biggest yard possible in the space. He wanted lots of scenery, lots of small industries, and he wanted a double track continuous main line. And that's all I knew about it. I sent him an additional questionnaire, and some of the things came back different to what I was expecting. By this time he had decided he didn't want to run passenger trains, it was going to be an all freight layout. However, I decided to keep the 28-inch radius curves. He wanted it for early diesel period. He would like a small engine terminal, but without wasting space on turntables and things like that. He confirmed that he would like a double track main line with a single track branch. He wasn't keen on duck unders or swing bridges to get into the layout room. He said no to lift out hatches for maintenance, and he confirmed some of the types of industries he wanted. Anyway, this is the first design I came up with. This is not a finished design by any means, it's just a general arrangement drawing, just to make sure that the curves would fit where I wanted them. Oh, he also said he wanted a mountainous area with a river, so here it is. He asked for a coal mine and a power plant. So I've put in my double track main line all the way around. I did try to get 30-inch radius curves here, but it simply wouldn't fit. The room is too narrow and there wasn't enough space to get this turned back in here either. But what this plan does show is the sort of scope of yard that is available in this space. The tightest spot on the plan is this S-bend in here. I really don't have a lot of straightaway between the two curves, and I'm using up virtually the full width of this benchwork over here. So I suggested to him that we allow the layout to flow over onto the knee walls, use the thickness of the wall openings, giving at least an extra 6 inches here. And his answer came back, yes, he was open to doing that. And those few inches made a huge difference to the plan. The only other comments that came back on this sketch was that he wanted me to get rid of the harbour area and replace it with a lot of small industries. And then he said he liked everything else, the way it was going. So with that in mind, I continued working on the layout to get him a finished drawing. Let's go and have a look at that now. So here is the finished design that I sent him. The first thing that may jump out at you is that I have flipped the whole plan left to right. That's because I felt that with using these openings, it was much better to have the wider openings on this side of the mine, because we get a better scenic view here and we have good access to this junction, which is fairly well towards the back of the layout. And at this side, having these smaller openings, it didn't really make any difference. So that's why I flipped the plan. And if we look at this end, going over into the reveal of the wall thickness, we see that this reverse curve now comes a lot closer to the front of the layout. So we are saving all this space behind it. Now, I don't regard this as an ideal plan by any stretch of the imagination. It lacks staging. Personally, I don't like to draw layouts without staging, but in this case I was specifically told at the beginning he doesn't want to waste space on a staging yard. He doesn't want a lot of complexity of levels. He just wants slight elevation changes, and he plans on using the main yard as a fiddle yard as well. Every now and again he's just going to take his excess trains off the track and then put new ones on. And although I don't personally favour doing that in the visible portion of the layout, it's his layout and that's the way he wants to run it. So we have a 6-track freight yard. The longest track here is 8 feet long, which is plenty long enough for his 12-car freight with 2 diesels and a caboose, which is what he said was going to be his maximum train length. The back track is a thoroughfare track, which gives access to a whole host of industrial spurs. We have a proper double-ended caboose track here and a small engine terminal as requested. We have leads at both ends of the yard so that everything can be switched without interfering with mainline trains, because remember his main MO when it comes to operation is to want to see 2 trains running continuously. I never received his structure list that I requested, so instead of having specific industries that are all just generic, I've just left plenty of spaces around the industrial spurs, other than things like the coal mine and the power plant, which form the 2 ends of a major traffic pattern. I've still got the steep branch line incline down passing under the main, where he's got a whole load of small industries. I deliberately hooked the mine branch on a long way from the main yard, so that trains, after arriving at the mine with empties and switching them for loads, it will run approximately 3/4 of the way around the main circuit before arriving at the yard. Now, if he feels that that is still too short, he can have them make 1 or more circuits of the main line before pulling in, and then it will be switched out and the yard switcher will exchange loads for empties at the power plant, which is within yard limits. And although this branch line here can also be treated as being within yard limits, I think it's a lot more interesting to run with a caboose on the end of the train both ways, and for that reason I put a run round loop in here. It's long enough for a single unit diesel to run around 7 40-foot cars and a caboose, and with a train of that length the 2.75% grade on the branch is not going to be a problem. Mainline grades are around 1.5%, and the coal mine has a short section of 2.5% grade. Anyway, I sent this plan off to the customer and it came back a couple of days later that he wanted some changes. Some of the things he asked for were an oil refinery. He wanted to know if this triangle here was a good place for it, and I thought it probably was, because it's between 2 tracks, so that we could have raw material in on one side and the refined product out on the other. So I said, yeah, that was a good place to put it. The major change he wanted was to rip out the entire yard and put in a city and a passenger terminal. At first I was a little concerned by this change of events, firstly because the yard was the key to everything. Taking the yard out means that there's no longer any way of operating in a meaningful manner, because there's no staging yard, and even both branch lines rely on the yard for origination and termination of the trains. And the second problem I have with this is that the curves, as I mentioned earlier, are rather tight for passenger trains. If he had wanted a passenger oriented layout right from the beginning, I would not have attempted to fit this shape, this footprint in the room. I would have gone for an around the walls oval with a hinge gate in the middle and then put the branch line down the middle, because I would have liked to have had curves like around about 34-36 inch radius for passenger trains. But one thing I have learned designing layouts for other people is that my ideals aren't always shared by others, and sometimes I have to do things that I don't like doing because that's just what the customer wants. Let's go to the next plan. Here's the sketch that came back. You can see here he's ripped out the yard, he left some of the industrial spurs at the back and said, can I fix this area here? But the alignment just doesn't work in here anymore. So after giving it some more consideration, this is what I came up with. I moved the rear main line forward slightly to make it the site for the passenger station. Originally the plan was to have it hidden behind a row of background structures, but now I've brought it into full view, and the premise here is that the trackage in the foreground is a small yard for local traffic, while the main line running behind it at a higher level is the result of a grade separation project. Such arrangements are fairly common in larger cities throughout the nation, so visually it works well with two main lines running through the same scene. I widened the benchwork slightly to allow for an extra passing track in front of the main lines, and I found room for two tracks behind it along Main Street, and there's 3 full city blocks available. He wanted to have space for a lot of small downtown structures and a long road with some street lamps and cars. And with 3 full city blocks available, I think there should be enough room for the whole range of the Walters Merchant Row and DPM small town Main Street structures. Anyway, I sent this plan off a few days ago, and the initial response was that he thinks it looks really good. I'm still waiting to hear back as to whether I'm going to be getting the contract to build it. This plan is certainly a lot simpler and cheaper to build than the other one, because the simplified yard reduces the turnout count substantially. And when it comes to the track laying and wiring stage, the cost of the layout is basically a function of the number of turnouts. When it comes to building this layout, there is one slight complexity in that it is longer than my workshop. So what I will do is leave about an 18-inch section out of the main yard to start with. There'll still be enough room to get through the entry into the room, and then once the layout is complete and tested, then I will dismantle the 2 ends, pack those up for shipping, and then add the extra section in the yard.
Well, although the customer loved that last layout plan that I sent him, I'm not going to get to build it because he has decided that he can't afford my price. It's unfortunate really. I was looking forward to it. Instead, he's going to have a local carpenter build it for him. And actually, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out, because most decent carpenters charge more per hour than I do. And unless his guy has a knowledge of model railroading, I can't see how he's going to be able to produce the benchwork without a detailed working drawing. And that drawing would take longer to produce than it would take me to build the benchwork in the first place. So that's the last we're going to hear about that layout. And that's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.